The screen of my phone was a cascading waterfall of notifications, a relentless digital roar that had been going on for 24 hours straight. A single screenshot was plastered everywhere: Twitter, Reddit, Facebook, even on the morning news blogs. It was a screenshot of an email. My email. The title that seemed to be trending globally was, "Husband's Savage Response to Ex-Wife's I Want You Back. Email Goes Viral." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my morning coffee, watching the numbers climb. Likes, shares, comments. A digital tidal wave of judgment, all crashing down on one person. My ex-wife, Chloe. I felt nothing but a quiet, calm sense of order being restored to the universe. A balanced equation. My calm was interrupted by the furious buzzing of my apartment's intercom. I didn't need to see the camera to know who it was. She'd been calling my phone nonstop, but I'd blocked her number hours ago. Coming to my door was her last desperate move. I pressed the talk button. "Chloe," I said, my voice as flat and emotionless as a concrete floor. Her voice came screaming through the speaker, distorted by rage and panic. "Mark, you have to take it down. You have to. My life is ruined. You've destroyed me." She was sobbing now, the performative tears I knew so well. She was furious that I had exposed her manipulation to the world, but she seemed to have conveniently forgotten that she was the one who had methodically and ruthlessly destroyed my life, piece by piece, and left me for dead. She thought her sweet, nostalgic email about second chances and the love we lost would work its old magic. She never imagined that instead of replying privately, I would hit reply all, forwarding my response not just to her, but to her parents, her brother, and every single mutual friend whose email address I still had from our wedding guest list. And one of them, it seems, had decided to share it with the world. You might be wondering what kind of man would do something so cruel, so public. Why would I humiliate the woman I once promised to love and cherish? The simple answer is this: because for 10 years, she and her family had conducted a private and systematic humiliation of me, and it was finally time to bring the receipts into the light. To understand why I clicked send, you have to understand the decade of debt she was trying to collect on. Her screams through the intercom were a strange, distorted echo of a voice I once found enchanting. To understand the email, you first have to understand the wedding. When Chloe and I got married, I was 25 years old and blinded by what I thought was love. I was a software developer from a blue-collar family, the first to go to college. I worked 2 jobs to pay my way through school and had a small but growing savings account. Chloe was different. She came from money, or at least the appearance of it. Her father was a mid-level executive at a bank, and her mother didn't work. They lived in a nice house in the suburbs and belonged to the local country club. To them, I was a project, a fixer-upper. They smiled at me during family dinners, but their questions were always loaded. "A software developer? Is there long-term stability in that?" her father would ask, despite tech being the fastest-growing industry in the world. Her mother would comment on my clothes, suggesting stores that were far beyond my budget. "We just want Chloe to have the life she's accustomed to," they'd say. It was their polite way of telling me I wasn't good enough. The real problem, however, was her brother, Kevin. He was the golden child. While I had worked my fingers to the bone, Kevin had coasted through a business degree, funded entirely by his parents, only to rack up credit card debt trying to become a social media influencer. The first major test came a few months before the wedding. Kevin had gotten himself into a $15,000 hole with a combination of bad investments and a lifestyle he couldn't afford. Her parents were wringing their hands, worried about the family's reputation. Chloe came to me, her eyes full of tears. "My dad will be so disappointed in him," she'd said. "It would mean the world to me, to us, if you could help him out, just to get him back on his feet. It would show my parents how serious you are about being part of this family." I should have seen the red flag, waving like a battle standard. But I was young and in love. I wanted to be the hero, the provider. So I drained my savings account, the money I had set aside for a down payment on a house for us, and I paid off her brother's entire debt. I thought I was buying my way into their hearts. In reality, I was just showing them the price tag for my loyalty, and they were taking meticulous notes. That $15,000 wasn't a one-time payment. It was an entrance fee. And once you pay the fee, you're expected to keep paying the dues. The wedding planning was the next stage. Chloe's parents had promised to split the cost, a grand gesture to their friends at the country club. But when the invoices started arriving, their contributions became vague promises. "We'll get you back for the caterer, Mark," her dad would say with a pat on the back. "Your mother-in-law just has her heart set on those particular flowers," he'd explain, as I swiped my credit card for an absurdly expensive floral arrangement. I ended up putting nearly the entire wedding on my cards, convinced that this was the final hurdle to prove my worth. After we were married, the demands simply became more familiar. My salary was our salary, but her family's problems were also our problems. Her father's car needed a major repair. Her mother wanted a new kitchen. Each time, Chloe would approach me with the same carefully crafted performance of distress and helplessness. "I know it's a lot to ask, Mark, but they're my parents. What are we supposed to do? Let them suffer?" Suffering, in their world, was driving a 5-year-old Lexus or cooking in a kitchen that was vaguely outdated. Meanwhile, I was working 60-hour weeks, taking on freelance projects on weekends just to stay afloat and pay down the debt I was accumulating on their behalf. The biggest sacrifice came about 2 years into the marriage. I was offered a senior position at a major tech firm in Seattle. It was a dream job, a significant pay rise, stock options, and the chance to lead a team. It would have set us up for life. I was ecstatic, but when I told Chloe, her face fell. "Seattle? But my family is here. My whole life is here." Her parents immediately chimed in. Her mother cried about losing her only daughter. Her father spoke of duty and staying close to your roots. Kevin complained about who would help him with his business ventures. They weren't asking me to consider Chloe's feelings. They were demanding I sacrifice my future for their comfort. And I did. I turned down the job. I told my prospective boss that family circumstances had changed. I chose Chloe and her family over my own ambition. I was running on a treadmill, working harder and harder just to stay in the same place, while my wife and her family cheered me on from the sidelines. I didn't realize the machine was designed to run me into the ground. After turning down the Seattle job, a quiet resentment began to build in me. I knew I couldn't keep working myself to death in a job I no longer loved, so I decided to take a gamble on myself. With the little capital I had left and a small business loan, I started my own software consulting firm. For the first year, it was a brutal grind, but it started to work. I landed a few small clients, then a mid-sized one. Money was starting to come in. For the first time in years, I felt a glimmer of hope, a sense of control over my own destiny. But my success was a beacon for Chloe's family. Kevin, her brother, suddenly saw me not as his brother-in-law, but as a venture capitalist. He pitched me an idea for a high-end sock subscription box. It was a terrible idea, and I politely declined to invest. The result was a month of passive-aggressive comments from Chloe's parents about not supporting family. Chloe herself began pushing for us to upgrade our lifestyle. "We can finally afford that bigger house," she'd say, pointing to listings in the same neighborhood as her parents. I tried to explain that every dollar needed to be reinvested into the business, that we were still in a fragile stage. She saw my prudence as a personal rejection. She didn't see the business as our future. She saw it as her personal expense account that I was being stingy with. Then came the crash. It happened faster than I could have imagined. My biggest client, accounting for nearly 70% of my revenue, was unexpectedly acquired by a larger corporation, and they immediately terminated all external contracts. The pipeline I had been building wasn't mature enough to absorb the blow. Within 3 months, I went from being profitable to being insolvent. I had to let my 2 employees go. I had to close the office. The business loan I had taken out was now a crushing personal debt, and I had nothing to show for it. I was ruined. I went home to tell Chloe, expecting a hug, some words of comfort, "We'll get through this together." I got none of that. I saw a flicker of something in her eyes I'd never seen before: contempt. Her parents were even worse. At Sunday dinner that week, her father looked at me with smug disappointment. "I told you it was a risky venture, Mark. Should have stuck with a stable job." My years of funding their lifestyle, paying for their son's mistakes, financing their daughter's wedding, all of it was forgotten. I was no longer the reliable workhorse. I was a failure. The silence in our house became heavier than any argument. I had failed. I was no longer useful. I didn't know it yet, but she was already drafting her exit strategy, and my name wasn't in it. The emotional distance soon became a physical one. Chloe started spending more and more time with her mother. She'd come home late, smelling faintly of a cologne that wasn't mine. She stopped wearing her wedding ring, claiming it was being cleaned. The excuses were flimsy, insulting. She wasn't trying to hide her affair. She was trying to make me feel stupid for not seeing it sooner. The end came on a Tuesday afternoon. I came home from a dispiriting job interview to find her packing suitcases in our bedroom. There were no tears, no dramatic confrontation, just the cold, efficient movements of someone closing a business account. "What are you doing?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. She didn't even look at me. "I can't do this anymore, Mark," she said, folding a sweater with perfect precision. "The stress, the debt, the negativity, it's drowning me. I need to think about my own well-being." It was the kind of therapy speak people use when they want to justify selfish behavior. She told me she was leaving, that she'd be staying with her parents for a while. It was a lie. As she walked out the door, a silver Mercedes I'd never seen before pulled up to the curb. The driver was Richard, a wealthy, divorced vice president from her father's bank. A man they had once mocked at a family dinner for being old and boring. Now, he was her escape plan. "We've been seeing each other for a few months," she said, without a hint of shame. "He understands what I need." What she needed, apparently, was financial security. The next day, I found out the full extent of her betrayal. She had gone to our joint bank account and withdrawn every last cent, a little over $5,000 that I had scraped together for rent and bills. She left me with a negative balance and a mountain of debt from my failed business. I called her parents, thinking, naively, that they would be horrified. Her mother was cold. "Chloe needs to be happy, Mark. Richard can give her the life she deserves." They had not only known about the affair, they had encouraged it. I was a failed investment, and they were simply cutting their losses and moving their asset to a more profitable portfolio. In the span of a week, I had lost my business, my wife, my home, and every dollar to my name. I was alone, in a house filled with memories that now felt like evidence from a crime scene. I sat there in the silence, utterly broken. In that moment of complete desolation, I understood a fundamental truth. They didn't just leave me, they had tried to erase me. I had two choices. I could let this break me, or I could let it be the fuel for a fire. I decided to build a furnace. The furnace I decided to build required fuel, and for the first few months, the only fuel I had was humiliation. I was served with an eviction notice. I sold our furniture, my furniture, for pennies on the dollar just to have enough cash to rent a tiny, dingy room in a shared apartment across town. I sold the car I had bought, the nice clothes Chloe had insisted on, and the watch she gave me for our first anniversary. Each item I let go of felt like shedding a layer of a false identity I had worn for a decade. I was no longer Mark, Chloe's husband, the provider for her family. I was just Mark, a man with nothing but a laptop, a mountain of debt, and a deep, simmering rage that I channeled into a cold, unbreakable focus. In that cramped room, surrounded by peeling paint and the noise of strangers through thin walls, I had a moment of painful clarity. My entire sense of self-worth had been outsourced. It was tied to Chloe's happiness, her parents' approval, her brother's stability. When they withdrew their approval, they took my identity with them. I had given them the power to define me, and they had defined me as a failure. I vowed that would never happen again. My worth would no longer be determined by anyone else's valuation. It would be built by my own hands, for my own reasons. I went back to what I knew, coding. I took on any freelance gig I could find on online platforms. Small, tedious jobs for low pay, debugging someone else's messy code, building a simple web page for a local business. I worked 18-hour days, fueled by instant noodles and cheap coffee. The work was mind-numbing, but it paid the bills and, slowly, began to chip away at my debt. More importantly, it immersed me back in the world I had abandoned for Chloe. While working on a project for a logistics company, I noticed a massive inefficiency in how they tracked their short-haul deliveries. There was no simple, affordable software solution for small to medium-sized businesses. The big enterprise solutions were too expensive and complex. An idea began to form. I spent my nights and weekends, every spare moment I had, building a prototype. It was a simple, elegant software platform designed to solve that one specific problem. I poured all my pain, my anger, and my focus into lines of code. 6 months after being left with a negative bank balance, I launched my software, a simple website with a subscription model. For the first time in my life, I wasn't building something for someone else's approval. I was building it for me. A week later, the first subscription payment hit my account, for the grand total of $19.99. I felt more powerful than I ever had spending thousands on Chloe's family. It wasn't just money, it was proof. That first $19.99 was the single drop of rain that starts a flood. The next week, 3 more small businesses signed up. The week after, 10. My software did exactly what it promised. It was simple, affordable, and it saved businesses time and money. Word began to spread through online forums and industry newsletters. Small business owners, tired of being ignored by the big tech giants, found a solution built specifically for them. Within 6 months, I had over 1,000 paying subscribers. The revenue stream was no longer a trickle. It was a steady, growing river. The first thing I did was hire back one of the developers I had to let go from my failed firm. The look of relief and gratitude on his face was worth more than the money. We moved the company out of my cramped bedroom and into a small, functional office space. It wasn't glamorous, but it was ours. Every piece of furniture, every computer monitor was bought and paid for by the value we were creating, not by debt or the hope of someone's approval. With the steady income, I systematically paid off every single cent of the debt that had crushed me. The day I made the final payment on that old business loan was the day I truly felt free. The chains Chloe had left me in were finally broken. 5 years passed. 5 years of relentless work, strategic decisions, and steady growth. Logi simple. The company born from my rock bottom was no longer a small startup. We had 50 employees, a beautiful office downtown, and were recognized as the leading logistics software provider for small and medium-sized enterprises in the country. My net worth, on paper, had crossed into 8 figures. I was no longer the boy from the wrong side of the tracks trying to impress his in-laws. I was the man who built an empire from the ashes of the life they had helped burn down. I had learned to set boundaries, to say no, and to value my own time and energy above all else. In all that time, I had 0 contact with Chloe or her family. I had blocked their numbers and social media profiles on day 1 of my new life. I never asked about them. I never looked back. They were ghosts, from a past I had no interest in revisiting. My life was about the future. I was happy, stable, and at peace. Then, one Monday morning, as I was reviewing our quarterly growth reports, an email landed in my personal inbox, slipping past my spam filters like a snake in the grass. The sender was Chloe. The subject line read, "Thinking of you." My heart didn't leap. It didn't ache. It turned to ice. I let the email sit in my inbox for the rest of the day, a single unread line of poison amidst a sea of legitimate business. I knew, with absolute certainty, that opening it would be like inviting a vampire back into my home. But curiosity, cold and clinical, got the better of me. That evening, in my quiet, minimalist apartment that overlooked the city I had conquered, I finally clicked on it. The text was exactly what I expected, a masterclass in manipulative sentimentality. It began with a lie wrapped in nostalgia. "Hi, Mark. I know it's been forever. I was walking downtown today and passed by that little Italian place where you took me on our third date. It made me smile and think of you." She was rewriting history, painting our past with a soft focus lens, conveniently omitting the decade of exploitation that followed. Then came the vague, self-serving apology. "I've done a lot of growing up these past few years. I was so young and confused back then, and I made mistakes I regret every day. I didn't appreciate the good man you were." It was a classic non-apology, blaming her youth instead of her choices. No mention of Richard. No mention of the affair. No mention of the stolen money. Next was the sob story, delicately woven in. Life has a funny way of teaching you lessons. Things with Richard didn't work out, and it's been a difficult road. A quick 5-minute search on Google told me the real story. Richard, the wealthy bank VP, had married a woman his own age 6 months ago. A glance at Chloe's public social media profiles painted a picture of a life that had stalled. She was living back with her parents, working a retail job at the mall. The country club life was over. Finally came the flattery and the hook. "I heard about your company's success, and I just wanted to say I'm so incredibly proud of you. I always knew you were destined for great things. I would love to catch up sometime, maybe for a coffee, for old time's sake. I always knew you were destined for great things." That line, more than any other, sealed her fate. She hadn't believed in me. She and her family had actively tried to smother my ambition. She wasn't proud. She was prospecting. For a moment, I considered hitting delete. It was the logical, emotionally healthy thing to do. But deleting it would leave the narrative she'd constructed unchallenged. It would allow her to believe that she was just a girl who made a mistake, not a cold-hearted predator who had picked my bones clean and left me to die. She had sent a fiction. I decided to reply with a ledger, an itemized invoice for a decade of my life. I clicked reply, and my fingers hovered over the keyboard. This wouldn't be a conversation. It would be a reckoning. Before I began to type, I did one last thing. I opened up my old contacts list, the one I hadn't touched in 5 years. Methodically, I began adding email addresses to the BCC line. Chloe's parents, her brother, Kevin, the maid of honor from our wedding, my old best man, aunts, uncles, cousins, and all those country club friends of her parents who had looked down on me with polite smiles. I compiled a list of nearly 100 people, the entire audience to the theater of our marriage. They had all seen the public performance. It was time they got a look behind the curtain. Then, I changed the subject line of the email to a final reconciliation of our account. I began to write. "Dear Chloe, thank you for your email. I have received your inquiry and have reviewed its contents. I'm glad you remember the Italian restaurant. I remember it as well. That meal cost me $74.50, a significant sum for me at the time. It was the first of many investments, both financial and emotional, that I would make in what turned out to be a profoundly unprofitable partnership. You mention you made mistakes. due to being young and confused. Allow me to refresh your memory with a more specific accounting, as your version of history seems to be heavily redacted. Your mistakes were not abstract. They were concrete actions. They included manipulating me into paying off your brother Kevin's $15,000 credit card debt with my house down payment fund. They included coercing me into paying for the majority of our $30,000 wedding after your parents reneged on their promise. They included pressuring me to turn down a senior position in Seattle that would have secured my career because your family's comfort was more important than our future. And, most notably, your mistakes included carrying on a months-long affair with a wealthier man while I was losing my business, and then stealing the last $5,217 from our joint account, leaving me to face eviction alone. You say you are proud of my success. Let me be unequivocally clear. My success was not achieved because of you, but in spite of you. The foundation of my company was built on the rubble of the life you and your family systematically dismantled. You don't get to claim pride in the harvest when you spent years trying to salt the earth. Your pride is not welcome here. It is an attempt to claim a dividend on an investment you cashed out of long ago. For the sake of closure, I have attached a summary ledger of the direct financial support I provided to you and your family over our decade together. The total, conservatively estimated, is $287,400. This does not include interest, nor does it quantify the lost opportunity cost of the Seattle position, which would be valued in the millions. As for your offer of coffee, I must decline. My company has a strict policy against partnering with individuals or entities with a history of fraudulent and destructive behavior. You are a liability I chose to write off 5 years ago, and my portfolio has performed exceptionally well since. This email serves as the final and complete closing of our account. Do not contact me again. Sincerely, Mark. I attached a meticulously detailed spreadsheet, itemizing every cost I could remember. Then, with a feeling not of anger, but of absolute final peace, I clicked send. The reckoning was delivered. It took less than 15 minutes for the storm to break. My phone, which had been peacefully silent on my desk, erupted into a cacophony of buzzing and ringing. The first wave came from our former mutual friends. Texts flooded in, ranging from shocked emojis to messages like, "Mark, holy crap, I had no idea." A few expressed sympathy, saying they'd always felt something was off. Others were appalled by my methods, calling me cruel. I read none of them in detail. They were just noise, the shrapnel from a controlled demolition. The second wave, far more predictable, was from her family. A voicemail from her father, sputtering with rage, threatening lawsuits for slander and defamation. An all-caps email from Kevin arrived. A barely coherent screed calling me a monster for airing their private family business. He was, of course, most offended by the public mention of his $15,000 debt. The truth, it seems, is only private when it's embarrassing. From Chloe's mother, there was only a damning silence. Her shame was always a quiet, calculated thing. By the next morning, it had escaped the confines of our social circle. Someone, likely a younger cousin or a friend who felt I had been wronged, took a screenshot and posted it to Reddit. From there, it caught fire. It was picked up by blogs, shared on Twitter, and became a trending topic. Husband's savage response. They called it savage, epic, a masterclass in revenge. To me, it was just the truth. It was an audit. And that brings us back to the beginning. To me, calmly sipping my coffee as the world reacted, and to Chloe screaming into my intercom. Her voice was raw with panic. "You've ruined me. My parents. My friends. Everyone knows. You have to retract it. Tell them you were lying." Her hysteria was not about a broken heart. It was about a broken reputation. I had destroyed her most valuable asset, her image. She had spent a lifetime curating a persona of the sweet, privileged girl who just couldn't catch a break, and I had shattered it with a single itemized email. After her rage subsided into desperate, sobbing pleas, I pressed the talk button one last time. "There's nothing to retract, Chloe," I said, my voice steady and calm. "The numbers are accurate. The account is closed." I let go of the button, cutting off her reply. I walked away from the intercom and the front door, leaving her alone with the consequences she had created. The screaming eventually faded, replaced by the distant sounds of the city. I didn't feel happy or triumphant. I just felt quiet. The noise that had lived in the back of my head for over a decade was finally gone. The ledger was balanced. The debt was settled. My furnace had done its job and forged a new life. Now, it was time to live it. In the weeks that followed, the full consequences of that email came into focus, not through any effort of my own, but through the quiet whispers of the digital world. Chloe's social media went dark. The last I heard, through a former mutual acquaintance who reached out, was that she was still living with her parents, having lost her retail job after the story became local gossip. The public humiliation had made her unemployable in the small, image-obsessed world her family had built. She was trapped in the gilded cage they had made, only now the gilding was gone. Her parents faced their own quiet ruin. They were a family that thrived on reputation, and their reputation was now in tatters. They were the talk of the country club, but not in the way they enjoyed. They were seen for what they were, users who had propped up their lifestyle with my labor and then discarded me. Their social circle, built on a foundation of shallow appearances, evaporated. As for Kevin, his dreams of being a funded entrepreneur vanished. No one was willing to invest in the entitled freeloader from the viral email. He had to get a real job. About a year later, my company, Loggy Simple, made a strategic acquisition of a small, regional bank to handle our expanding financial services. It wasn't until the final papers were signed that I saw the full employee roster. On it was Chloe's father, still a mid-level executive. My first instinct was to fire him, but I realized that would be an emotional decision, the kind the old Mark would have made. The new Mark was a CEO. Firing him would be messy. Leaving him there, forcing him to come to work every day knowing that the man he deemed unworthy was now the ultimate owner of his entire company, was a far more complete and quiet form of justice. My life moved on. The noise faded completely. I met someone new. Her name is Sarah. She's an architect, a woman who built her own success with her own hands. She knows my story, but she isn't interested in my net worth. She's interested in me. Our relationship isn't built on need or dependency, but on mutual respect and shared laughter. Last night, as we were cooking dinner in the kitchen of the home we built together, I looked at her and felt a sense of profound peace. The betrayal I suffered was not the end of my story. It was the violent, painful, and necessary prologue. The email wasn't just revenge. It was a declaration of independence. And in the quiet that followed, I finally found what I had been searching for all along, not the approval of others, but a quiet respect for myself.